Welcome back. It's been a long time. We've missed you.
We've been imagining,
making plans,
getting ready.
Staying at home and doing our bit. We've tried our best to stay connected.
There's nothing like the feeling when we're in the room together.
It feels so good to be live again.
Hi, and welcome to Blast. I'm Gemma Tipton, and I think that trailer said it all about being back in the theatre. One of the first shows I saw is one we'll be discussing today, Once Before I Go. I found it unbelievably strange to be in a darkened room watching people tell stories for me. And I think it took a couple of plays for that unusualness to unravel and become that thing we all love so much again. I also think another strange thing that happened was for a while, every single piece of art I saw, whether it was in a gallery or theatre, seemed to be about COVID. So whether it was about loneliness or fear or isolation or crowds, it all seemed to have this COVID-y message. And that's wearing off now, I'm delighted to say, although I have a lurking fear it might be waiting in the wings. Streaming, though, has been a brilliant development. And I do want to say huge congratulations to all the theatres and theatre companies that, on top of the very taxing and difficult work of putting on a play, have also managed to create streams. It's not as simple as pointing a camera. And I think, with the exception of one of the plays we're talking about today, they're all available for streaming. So you can go back to them, or if you didn't get to see them, you can see them for the first time. And that's an extraordinary development that I hope is here to stay. But I mean, one of the things I think we all missed so much, but the after theatre chats, which you don't get in the same way with streaming, those disagreements and thinking again. And so that's a lot of what we're going to do here today. And the wonderful thing about the invitation to be part of this session was it threw me right back in to watching plays, and so many of them. And I'm absolutely delighted and slightly in awe to be chairing our three panelists. So let's meet them. We have Blast co-founder Peter Crawley, who's a journalist and a critic, currently at the Dock in Accenture. He's contributed a lot to the Irish Times and to Irish Theatre magazine, and I've always loved his take on theatre and on the world. Then we're joined by Helen Meany, who is a journalist, a critic, an all-round amazing arts person who writes about Irish theatre for The Guardian. And she used to edit Irish Theatre magazine and was an arts editor at the Irish Times. And I had thought Brian Singleton was therefore unusual in this bunch for not writing for the Irish Times, but I looked him up and he has. But that's not his main claim to fame. He is, more importantly, the drama and theatre professor at Trinity and academic director at the Lear. He's an author and editor and is deeply fascinating on pretty much everything theatrical and otherwise. So it's going to be a great afternoon, I think. We'll be talking about 6 plays individually and collectively. So do please send in your own questions and observations as we go. But I'm actually going to now shut up and hand straight over to Helen to maybe lead off on talking about the first play we're going to look at today, Once Before I Go, at the Gate.
Sure, thank you, Gemma. Thanks for this lovely introduction. Yeah, just to come back to pick up on what you were saying, that was my first, this this Once Before I Go was my first show of the festival, and there was a real sense of delight with people being out and queuing up to go into the gate, which was the first show back at the gate. It had been closed for dark for a year, so it was a kind of a giddy experience going in, and also to see the different configuration of the gate, where we were seated in a more of a cabaret style at tables at the front of the auditorium, and that seemed very appropriate for this production, which is written by Philip McMahon, directed by Selena Cartmel. Once Before I Go is a very ambitious look at over 4 decades, really, but looking back at the experience of the AIDS epidemic and how that the impact that it had on the gay community, gay and lesbian community in the 80s, in late 80s in Dublin, and of course the way that had a sort of a diasporic effect with so many people left Ireland because of the fact that homosexuality was still illegal, and because of the homophobia in general, hostility, and because there was a sense of shame in some families around the fact that, first of all, they had a gay son or brother, and then that he may have contracted AIDS and possibly was terminally ill. So it's a huge sensitive subject, and it was marvelous to see this being tackled in the theatre. We'd seen with Anu Productions Faultline a couple of years ago, looking at just a kind of a glimpse of this, and also there's been the television series, and the Normal Heart is running in London, so it's almost as if there's something in the air at the moment to do with looking back at AIDS. And it could be partly because of the experience of COVID, of course, but this Irish experience hasn't really been held up to the light the way this production does, and so it's quite something to take on, and the spanning from the opening in the present day. In London, in an apartment where two people at the end of their 50s and almost 60, I think, have an unexpected encounter, having not seen each other for a quarter of a century, when they were young activists and very heavily involved in the gay rights movement back in Dublin. So we open in the present, we go back, and then we move forward to the 1990s, and it follows the relationship between a couple, two young Irishmen and one of their sister, and it's trying to, I think, within that lens, we're trying to encompass a lot of trying to get a sense of a cohort, or of a community, of a generation. So it's a lot to attempt. I think it partially succeeds, and I thought that the most beautiful and poignant moment was the 1990s section in the third act, where the two main characters, Bernard and Dahi, are living in Paris and really doing their best to live it up. It's champagne, it's drag, it's going out dancing and clubbing, but it's almost a defiant. It's living like that, savoring every moment, because the character Bernard is dying. And actually it's extremely affecting. And I think everything that goes before finally, for me, kind of came together in that. I
did find that face masks also are very good for wiping gobs of tears away.
Yes, it was very moving, and there were people audibly crying near me during the performance.
Do you think it played differently because I think one of the reasons AIDS in the 80s are being so re-examined is a generation is now coming into adulthood that have no memory of it, no living memory of it. And do you think it would play differently to people to whom that is new?
Definitely. And I think there was a sense that Philip McMahon was trying to convey information, to educate and inform people who didn't know anything about this history. Now, I'm not in that position because I was around then. So So I have been, wondering about that. But then it's a question, it's sort of a dramaturgical question about how do you actually impart that historical information in within the drama, and how do you avoid feeling that you're being given a history lesson? Um, and I don't think it fully succeeded in that. And I think, I was comparing it with, say, Least Like the Other, the Irish National Opera's treatment of Rosemary Kennedy's story, and wondering whether ways of incorporating in the design more of that, the information, the headlines, are using docudrama style techniques, or to kind of to make it a more of a theatrical incorporation of this complicated political and social and cultural history. That's a lot to ask, but it could be that the first two acts still need a little bit more shaping, I think, sculpting to get us to that point where we really feel that the heart of the drama is the relationship between these two characters.
You're nodding away there, Peter. What do you think?
I agree. I agree on so many points. I found this such a satisfying play production to engage with critically. I mean, like you were talking about kind of the strange sensation about being around people in a space again, and how what that, does it feel? Do you feel hesitant, or do you feel willing to engage with it? I felt that kind of, reverted to type very naturally and reassuringly, which is I distrusted everybody around me. I resented their proximity. I judged their behavior. And then I got to work in grips with sort of making sense of a production, having a critical reaction to something on the stage again, which to me was sort of Christmas coming again. And it was a very satisfying play to watch, because I do feel that it's an emotive and important subject to broach. And it's also an emotive and important thing to see Philip McMahon on the stage of the Gate now. I feel kind of like his time is now. He should be, one of our foremost playwrights. And it's equally satisfying to be unsatisfied by a production to try and reason why. So I don't so much see it as a play about the AIDS epidemic. I see it as a grand history of the civil rights struggle for LGBTQ plus society in Ireland, and AIDS is necessarily a part of that. I see Philip as, a young person dealing with that. And when I say young, I mean he's my age, and therefore, must be considered young still, right? Okay,
Time of
sure.
life.
He's a very, and always has been, a very attentive and very reverent student to a kind of like a hidden history, or an underexplored, undersung history, which is the gay rights movement told through a personal perspective. Okay, he is fascinated by the queer narrative. He's taught me the queer narrative through his works with This Is Pop Baby, through his works as a playwright. And the thing I think, the reason that there's this tension that Helen's described so well, is that this is a play that is queer in content, and it's not queer in form at all. He's actually, as a playwright, he's quite a traditionalist. And you sort of see that in his work for the Abbey or the Gate, that sort of structurally he tends to lean to kind of, fairly tried and tested forms. He's more naturalistic, more realistic even, as a playwright. Then he is a maker of theatre for This Is Pop Baby, which tends to blur the barriers between sort of the club and the gig and the theatre. Here he goes back into the sort of like the considered structured play, and he reaches for naturalism as the mode through which to put the movement into figures, into characters. And it's too much to invest in these three people. And I think the consequence is then you telescope the broad swathe of that movement into individual speakers, which necessarily moves you towards, in the case of Bernard and Dahi, kind of tart-tongued witticisms, nearly epigrammatic, a little overdetermined, enjoyable, but not quite real. In the case of Lynn, can I just finish this? Just in case of Lynn, a sloganeerer, somebody who is making political points. And it's so on the head when it comes to historical drama that it doesn't quite feel real, doesn't quite ring. When people listen to songs, they listen to the hits. They don't listen to the B-sides. And it's kind of like, it tends to be the essentializing nature of historical drama done this way. And in another way, I found kind of quite revealing, when it does reach for kind of a queerness in aesthetic, it's also kind of playing the hits. There's a very clear reference to Angels in America, when a character who's kind of heavy on sort of his antiviral medication is having hallucinations in which characters sort of transcend across spaces. It's quite indebted, so it's reverential, I think, to the history, reverential to the theatre history, and therefore not able to sort of extend its own aesthetic to make that history feel real, make that history feel living.
I was actually interrupting in order to agree with you. in
Ah,
that
oh, in
I
that
felt
case, you should have,
I
yeah.
I wanted more nuance in particularly in the character of Bernard. He looked beautiful. He had the presence I was looking for, but I wanted more layers and depth to him. How did you find it, Brian?
As someone who lived through it all and had two friends, I'd been to AIDS wards in Britain where two friends died. I was pleased that it wasn't queer, that it was real, and they were played really with realism, and it, as you mentioned earlier, Helen mentioned earlier, it follows on from Faultline and New Productions. They both use the Irish Queer Archive as the source material, and I think that if there's a tension in the play, it's between the opening scene and the drive of the whole play. The opening scene features very much a trans character in London, a young trans man, and but that's where queer politics is now.
Yeah.
Right now, it's not in AIDS politics, HIV/AIDS, so much as in trans, and so it's a way into going back into history. That's the way I saw it, and so I can understand why you would want more of a fleshed out character of Bernard, but I honestly think there's a whole play for him that we haven't seen yet, and I think I was reading a review of yours, Helen. I think you said that very thing.
Yes.
It's there are, because there are intersecting lives there, and we move. All we see is Bernard on the night he comes out to his family and gets beaten up, and then the next thing we see, he's in Paris dying of an AIDS-related illness, and there's not much in between. But then again, I would say. The one thing that Faultline showed us in 1982 was the Faultline year. Two gay men were murdered. This was a high profile. And Garda Síochána then decided to go and interrogate gay men, take their names and addresses in the gay pubs, and threaten them with exposure to family and work and colleagues in work. So there's this mass exodus in the 80s. So that's the backdrop to these lost lives, in a way. And so the play for me was about absence. We don't we and we want to know what happened to them. All we know is the snatches of we know he died, and we know Duffy moved to London, but we don't know much about what Duffy did in London. What the struggles were after his partner died in Paris. So that absence is, in a way, is the gay diaspora needs to be written. It needs to be written back into the trajectory of Irish history.
Yeah.
That's what, for me, that's what the play does. And also in relation to the big thing that I got out of it, because again, like you, I this wasn't the first play I'd seen live. It was a new productions outside to begin with, which is great. But all the things that you were talking about, Peter, about your neighbours and their behaviour, this is exactly what it was like in the 80s with HIV/AIDS. Could I get, if you touched a glass by the same person, would you get it? Is it a death sentence? We're all going through this now, to the point where in the early days of COVID, people were being shamed for having it. Right? So this play is about the transcending of shame for me, transcending it, and it's got the great humanity in it. I was really moved by it, and yeah, I totally get, this is Pop Baby queers everything, and it's wonderful. But Philip's last play, in the Abbey or the Peacock Theatre, was very realistic, and I just like to see gay characters being real, but not being the problem in the play. right? They are the play, not the problem in it. So anyway.
Drawing on that idea of re-examining histories and telling histories that may be sliding out of memory, going further back in time. Ryan, do you want to talk us through the Book of Names?
Yeah, absolutely. This was the first one I saw, and it's in Dublin Port, the Pump House. And if you don't know where that is, you will get lost. Well, I got lost because I came too early before Dublin Theatre Festival put the sign up. But that was wonderful in itself to see the size of the place and the size of those ships and being up close. And with this, it's the War of Independence, which is the subject of this play. Is almost something that we don't want to talk about, and the Civil War afterwards. It's because it's lived with us for ever since, and it's well, in typical a new fashion, we are led into the history, and if you haven't seen it yet, just anything that happens once you get scanned, just be prepared that because the play begins before the play begins. And but again, we were into the Pump House and immersed in the dilemma of young men caught up in this war against the British before the treaty is signed. And it's based on two books. One is a ledger that is a 100-year-old ledger of the names, ages, and occupations of everyone who worked at Dublin Port. A really important historical document. But the other book is a book of intelligence, an intelligence dossier of a secret IRA unit called Q Company, based in the docks, and they apparently were responsible for 97% of the arms shipments coming into the country for the War of Independence. So really, these are people who are almost written out of history, and yet were extremely crucial in the creation of it. And so, we're immersed in various scenes, really up close to actors, and I didn't feel uncomfortable because this is one where temperature checks are done beforehand. But there are 8 men, eight characters, and we get snatches of their involvement, little impressionistic snatches of it. They look at us directly and ask us what we would do, what choices we would make. You can't answer, you don't have to. And then I came across the most disturbing character of all. But the whole War of Independence is disturbing because there's huge chaos in the city and suspicion of everyone's suspicion of everyone else. But there's this wonderful character, Harriet Lavery, played by Una Kavanagh, and she comes across as the most disarming, um, wonderful, affable woman who talks about the photographs. So she has a photographic studio on North Earl Street because she gave me her calling card, which I have here. And I've got the address, 13 North Earl Street, just near the Spire. And she was photographing, her studio was photographing many people belonging to the British establishment, particularly the military and the Dublin Metropolitan Police, and not so much the Black and Tans, but figures that would become targets for the IRA, this Q Company, and so she was secretly smuggling in photographs that she had taken with the names of the soldiers and police that were to be assassinated, and there is a whole collection of them. And I must admit, I was quite disturbed by one scene when it was done in private. So I don't know. Very few people will have seen it, I think, but where there's a whole photograph with names on it, and I was to choose which one will be shot next. And they looked at me, which one will be shot next? And one of them was called Thomas Singleton. And I thought, oh, they've done that. Una's done that because she knows me. And I thought, so for the whole rest of the play, I hope they don't realize what my name is. And I've since discovered that he was nothing to do with me at all, absolutely no relation. But he was a Dublin Metropolitan Police in Clontarf, and he was the one that tipped off the rest of the police off about the imminent ambush of the auxiliaries coming out of Dublin Castle and going north, and prevented that. And there were quite a number of rebels who were either killed on the spot or shot later. And it's and who's been working with this troubled history from 2016 right through. So, and there are connections I made with their production of Sunder, which is the first of the triptych of shows that they did in 2016. Because one of the characters who was in Sunder actually gets to speak in this particular show. So we're immersed in that history. We are in. We have to make. We're essentially we're spoken to as if we are part of the company, and we have to
I
make.
also felt, I understand it's problematic where some people are singled out for special attention and everyone else is wondering what's going on and whether they're going to get chosen next. But I actually found the feeling of watching fellow audience members being led away to something we knew not what equally affecting. I felt we were sort of being divided to be conquered, and I felt that. Did you get taken out, Peter?
I did, so to speak, but I lived to tell the tale. Again, kind of one of these. I was absolutely, blown away by this production. I was surprised by how blown away I was, and then surprised that I was still surprised that I was blown away by it, because Anu have been making work in this manner for more than a decade, and I've seen an awful lot of the works, and my loins should be firmly girded at this point, and yet they were not. I think it's like Brian says, it's sort of a complicated history that is hard to reckon with because its consequences are still with us. And also because official versions of the history prefer not to look and examine at the mess. They tend to show it as sort of, essentially kind of predetermined. This happened, then this happened. And Anu plunge you into it. They plunge you into an intimate experience, into an immersive experience, when the history seems as yet unwritten, that it could go any way. And absolutely, you are made complicit and culpable, asked to decide, asked to participate. Like Brian, I was asked to mark somebody out in a book for murder and didn't, and felt after so many new productions that I had managed to, stick my courage or screw my courage to the sticking place, and yet found myself later in that same production utterly intoxicated, so to speak, in a dance with Q Company, fully indoctrinated, dizzy, surrounded by this extraordinary sound design from Philip Stewart, in this extraordinary movement performed by this company, and losing kind of perspective and critical faculties of those I'd been seduced into participation. And that's troubling, because again, Brian is talking about these men who are, the conscience about whether or not they kill. I was struck by how little conscience was on display by the young men of Q Company who were willing to shoot somebody at point blank range, and the aberration that one would bottle it, that one wouldn't, contribute to it. And that is a messiness of living that is still with us. That's there in every military or paramilitary movement. Young men who are willing to kill others to a cause, or just because there's something not quite right about them. To be back in this moment of it, I thought was kind of quite disorienting and quite affecting. And that we do live with the consequence of this action. We were split up at the start of that production into two groups and two tracks, and I completely forgot about the other group until we joined together at the end. And it kind of made its own point, because that is the moment, another sundering moment, and kind of which side of history do you belong? And then to come out of this very hermetic, like perfectly designed world, which is, usually, or rather unusual for a new who tend to sort of superimpose one on top of the other. You sort of see the past within the present, to then be delivered back onto the docks and see, the financial services center, to be back in the world of headlines that are about the division between Northern Ireland protocols and how two different situations deal with health and compliance on the same island, is again to see that consequence, to live that consequence, and then be aware of every juncture in history that has led us there. So yeah, I was again transported, made part of it, and kind of left
That
reeling.
splitting up was really successful, and I hadn't thought of it till you said that. When the other half of the audience came back, I thought, "Who are you? Get out of my
Yeah.
play. You're wrong and different."
Hmm.
Um, Helen, did you also have those misanthropic feelings?
No, because I'm not like that, Gemma. No, but the final scene to me was the most moving. It was so simple, but that these men, comrades, friends, brothers who had been together uh, through everything, were suddenly looking at each other, and one group looks at the other, and they're wearing the Free State uniform, and they're saying, "What did you come dressed as?" And it's just so the dialogue there was wonderful, and then it was like, "Well, what are we going to do now?" And then the answer is, "We go back in. We go back in, as in we fight, except we're now fighting these, our friends, our brothers, And I know that's civil war, and we know this in a theoretical way, but I was shattered by that. It was
I
just,
found that really moving.
yeah,
Yeah.
I just felt the tragedy of it. I really felt the tragedy of it that we're still living with today, and that for me was the most powerful part of the entire production. Um, I missed. I didn't have that moment with the photographs in the book. I kind of missed not having a slightly more directly interactive engagement. This time, it just happens to be the luck of the draw. And I know, and now I realize other people have said that to me about other Anu shows. Oh, I didn't see that bit, and they feel they sort of missed the kernel of it. I sort of feel I missed that intensity. I think what Anu do, that they draw you into this direct experience. So it's not, it's, because we use these words immersive and interactive, and they become sort of meaningless, but it's actually, you are being called on as you yourself to bring yourself to it. So it's a totally experiential, personal, subjective moment. In that moment when they ask you something, and you have to respond, you have to make a choice, you have to take a weapon, or you have to take drugs from someone, or you have to choose to get in the back of a car and be taken off, who knows where, whether you're with someone in the flow of Basaris at rush hour that's really happening, and you're with someone and you're in an entirely different drama, and yet the rest of the world is going on around you, and you have to choose, you have to keep deciding, God, I might just walk away from this now because I'm totally freaked out. Or you say, no, I'm going with this, and for me, that's the absolute uniqueness of Anu, and it makes them utterly special. And I didn't quite have that full hit with this, but I completely agree with what Brian and Peter are saying, that it was just superbly done. And the dance, I wanted to be dancing with it. I wanted to be part of that, exactly as Peter was saying. I was totally swept up by that choreography and the sound design, and just the sheer artistry of it, the care, the research, the direction, the costuming. It was superb work of art.
And,
It's
and we don't
actually,
often say this, but the writing,
The writing,
the
yes,
writing is,
yeah.
we tend to come out of a new and never sort of consider, because it always feels as though it's happening in the moment, and it's hard to kind of attribute single authorship to it because of the way that they work and they collaborate, the way these kind of productions come together through the rehearsal and development process. But Louise Lowe is credited as writer and director of this. I have to. One thing is, I was very aware of gender throughout, in a way, and not just because it's sort of such a topic, but because this felt like a very male perspective through a situation which was very male oriented, and particularly when it comes to historical narratives. I was fascinated once by a female historian of the American War of Independence, who said that the male letters, the letters that the men in the Independence War wrote, were rubbish because the men were always writing themselves into the historical narrative. They were always writing for a public. And the women were always writing about what was happening. They were writing about the mess. They were writing about who wasn't sleeping. They were writing about the chaos of it. I think kind of as an audience for history now, we're probably far more attuned to the latter, to the complexities, the sort of ambiguities, the gray area. I thought that that was clearest in the writing in this production when we're in that room with Harriet. And she's talking about how she takes the photograph of the subject, the RIC officer, and she sees him as a man, as a bully, as a threat. But she also sees him as a boy, somebody who's strutting, who's posturing, who's thinking of his mum. And kind of like, and you see then the tension, the ambiguities, the strangeness of the mark, the hit squad are looking for. And you feel again kind of the unwritten part of it, the tension of it, the thing that's waiting to be revealed. And I think the female perspective there, which is modest in terms of character, is far more insightful than the men who are kind of writing themselves into this psychotic fury.
It's also possibly important to give Landmark a shout because it's a collaboration this time. Did that make a difference, Brian?
I don't. I can't see the difference, to be honest. It's I mean, both companies are superb. They do really stunning 5-star work in everything that they do, and I thought initially that the collaboration would allow for bigger audiences because of Landmark's commercial success, but of course that isn't able to, it can't happen in COVID times. But I thought, well, I don't know what the collaboration was between the two companies. I just saw the work of art and thought it was one of the most incredible experiences I've had all year.
It'll be really interesting to see how it works in the streamed version, which I think opens on Monday.
I'm going to watch it actually. I'm going to watch it on Sunday night because I really want to see the bits that I didn't see, and also to see how they will, incorporate all those different angles and perspectives. But I think, I mean, judging by Louise Lowe's direction and camera work, filming of Landmark's The Savior, I'm sure, I've high hopes. Obviously, it'll be something different. It is not. It'll be another artifact or work of art. But I'm just really curious, and I can't wait to see it. I'm going to watch it over the weekend.
Can I just mention the design of the show with Owen Boss? I mean, he creates some of the most incredible environments that just take you. The detail, the level of detail that is in that set is quite phenomenal. Like because you're so close to everything, it can't be false. It has to be as real as possible, and to get that level of realism is just an extraordinary thing in itself. It's a work of art in itself.
Absolutely.
And talking of a play where every single audience has a different experience, while we have you, Brian, do you want to talk us through The First Bad Man?
Yes, I'm going to hold up the novel here, just to show you that I have read it. I did receive it and did read it because The First Bad Man is a novel by Miranda July, I think published around 2014 or 15.
2015, I think.
15. It wasn't on my radar until Pan announced that they were doing this show. And I didn't initially book a ticket for it because I didn't think I would have had the time to read this novel during term time. But I made the effort, and it's a very disconcerting novel. I found because it's written from the perspective of a woman in her 40s who is working at a self-defense studio for women in the USA, and she writes about, I would say, psychosexual fantasies, and we're not quite sure for at least half the novel what she's writing about is real, what she's actually experiencing is real. Some of it's quite disturbing, particularly when the teenage daughter of her boss, I think it is, who comes to stay with her and then won't move out, and they have this kind of sadomasochistic relationship, and then I don't want to give it away unless you haven't seen it or you haven't read the novel. But moving from the novel then into Pan Pan, the show. So we met at Wesley House, which is a church hall, a Methodist church hall in Rathmines, and it is. We go to a book club, and this is the book of the week, and we're all sitting around. Waiting for the show to happen. There are four. We know who are actors because they're dressed just that little bit differently to the rest of us, like yellow trousers and some silly costumes. And there's a table in the center with pizza boxes and teapots and mugs. So it's a book club, and we're all told to bring copies of our book with us. But if you didn't bring it, or if you didn't read it, and I'm looking at you, Helen. You didn't get it, I know.
I hadn't read it then.
Yeah. It's only and but there are lots of copies with you. So I thought I was going to be tested on it, and so I was literally I studied this page to page, and but we weren't. It became just a prop in a bigger immersive scenography, but we weren't immersed in it. And I believe there's a different story every night. There's 5 different stories, I think, 5 different versions of the show. And the marketing suggests that be brave and book all 5 nights or whatever. I didn't do that just the one night because there are other shows to see. But I thought the night I saw it, and Helen and Gemma, you were there the same night as well. So I thought, well, how else could they have done this? Because for most of the show, they did a kind of potted reenactment in a very post-dramatic way. So the actors they shared the roles out amongst themselves of the main characters, and then just spoke the some of the lines and some of the action really dispassionately. They really were not acting. And but for me it was really useful because I got roughly 50 minutes of the book cover to cover, and I said, "Oh, really? Was that what that was about?" And I got their version of it, and I felt quite satisfied at the end that it had actually helped me with the novel that I'd struggled with reading.
But did its value then go beyond a sort of Reader's Digest?
The Reader's Digest. I don't know. I mean, for me, I read loads of novels all the time, and I've read so many since lockdown because the theatres aren't open. But for me, it's a very private experience, and I've always resisted joining a book club because I don't want to perform a very private relationship with a book, and I don't want other people to ruin it for me. And so this show, I was afraid, was going to not alter my perception in a good way, but it actually was as weird as the book is, and I was wondering. One of the questions I had was, we're in a Methodist church hall. Do they realize what this book is? I don't know, but so I was having all these kind of exegetic questions that were nothing to do with the drama of the novel, about the nature of where we were and what we were doing. And I was looking at other people. Had they read it? Had they not? I was interested in what people were laughing at. I was wondering how on earth are they going to do the violence, perform the violence. And thankfully, that was just a short passage that we just read. So there was. I had never experienced anything like this before, and I have to say it was strangely satisfying. After the reading experience that not necessarily was. The one thing I did want was, I did notice about the young girl has a baby, Clee has a baby, and once that baby arrives, the first person narrative settles down. There's no fantasy, there's nothing, it's real, and I settled down as a reader and went with it right to the end of the book until the epilogue just sent it off into some other world of reality, and I ended up back where I began. And but the reenactment didn't focus on that, and I thought,
Peter, you got a different night, didn't you?
I didn't see it on the same night as you all managed to see it, so I can only gather I must have seen a different version to you. I only know that the details that I heard you discussing earlier made no sense to me. There was no reference for them. Um, uh, I I'm fascinated by the fact that there are apparently so many different versions of this performance and that it could alter from night to night. Because I didn't feel by the end of our performance that we were missing anything. The characters gather, they respond to the book, they share their ideas. I think in the second half, they say, shall we role play or shall we cosplay for our next? And they do. They perform those parts. They do salient passages from the book. They have us read a section of the book. They enact further. Um, I didn't know what they would do differently the next night, but I had a constant sense that what they were doing was informed by some sort of rules. This was a book club with rules that I didn't have any particular access to in this performance. So there are moments when everybody consults with their phone or takes a break or something, or and I wonder, are they taking instruction? Is there some sort of aleatory part of this performance in which they are going to do a sequence that they can summon either from memory, or does Andrew Bennett have an earpiece under that headband that's covering one of his ears? And it was teasing because then of all of Pan Pan's productions, which I would consider myself a fairly, earnest and applied student of, it was one I couldn't fathom the methodology that they had in play. I felt a little frozen out by that. That would be entreaty enough to come back another night just to try and discern what was going on. But to Brian's point, who does that during a festival? Who does that during a festival in which you have a limited number of nights to see a wide variety of productions, and in this time in particular when tickets are so hard to get for limited capacity? So it's such a strange exercise, and that exercise itself for Pan Pan felt to me like a sort of a model of a company's eccentricity. I think on your night as well, Pan Pan are part of your audience. You see members of the company sitting around this circular space in the Methodist Church wearing jumpers that are emblazoned Pan Pandemic. As though they have branded COVID-19 to their own ends, and kind of like, and that to be surrounded by people in black jumpers wearing the slogan Pan Pandemic is have a curious sort of slightly unsettling sense of menace all around you. The performance style is a little unnerving as well. Like Brian was saying, kind of, it's not naturalistic. There's something strange and removed about it. The eccentricity of the characters in the book seems to find a correspondence in the eccentricity of the characters in the book club. And you hesitate to say what it is, but why is Judith Roddy's character wearing kind of 1970s clothes? Why is another character, I think it's Luca Costello plays her, she struck me as the slightly menacing, unreadable, Clea-like figure anyway, which is to say young and different and self-possessed. The violence on my night is represented by her literally throwing copies of the book at Judith Roddy. You're just in a very dispirited way, but throwing them nonetheless. And so to me, all of this felt like another strange thing about Miranda Julie's book, which I didn't finish, and still hold forth on in much the way I would in a book club. I can only imagine if they're anything like the tutorials I used to go to as an English literature student. I could hold forth on any book after reading page 50 at least. But this was, it was a mirror of the strange things that happen to us in lockdown. It was performed like a religious ceremony. It begins and ends with sort of an incantation, a strange incantation. It seems to observe rituals. It's a ritualistic sense about it, and we congregate for it. We gather in a space together. We are regarded by the celebrants. They look at us, but they don't involve us. And so we're there for this kind of inaction of communion over whatever sort of strange process of symbols and ceremonies this involves. So it felt like it was kind of rushing in to fill the void of those things that we haven't really had direct proximate access to. I think it's no coincidence that this book, written in 2015, involves a character who is essentially a remote worker, who's fiddling with sort of video calls, who's developed this kind of super elaborate domestic ritual, and who has these fantasies about otherwise unattainable kind of individual relationships. So I felt like I understood why the material itself would hold an appeal before the slightly more ludic kind of flights of fantasy. And so it kind of made for a kind of an edgy experience. I absolutely, again, like I valued the experience. I still quite don't know what to make of it.
In the beginning of our session, I don't know if it happened in yours, Peter, they talked about the reason for their reenactment was to be cathartic because they actually couldn't stop talking about the novel at every book club session. So they were trapped in a loop. And Helen, did that obsession come through for you?
Yes, I mean it really did. You know, they've been meeting for 2 years and they talk about this one novel every week. I found that just fantastic as a premise. And then the way that the quirkiness of the members of the book club start to reflect some of the fantasies and obsessions of the characters in the novel. So when when they say, what's going to be our safe word for this, one of these sort of slightly arcane rules of the game they're playing. That, well, let's try. Okay, the safe word is Jeremy Irons, and one of the characters says in the book club says, "Oh no, I have a special connection to Jeremy Irons." And so, right, okay, and that's just like the character and her weird, her sort of self-deluded romance with Philip. Everything that is happening is entirely in her own mind, entirely in her imagination. And I thought that was just a very good observation in a very extreme way of how we all live, and the absolute unknowability that from the outside those other characters didn't quite know how extreme her fantasies and her delusions were, and that connected to the sort of I'd say pretty lonely characters who joined the book club and were then couldn't leave this thing behind. So it was sort of the layers. I loved the layers and the games and the game within the game, and it was very pan for me in the sense that it was undramatic, almost stripped of theatricality, stripped of drama, post-dramatic, as Peter said, and that kind of affectless, flat delivery, which I'm very partial to. It always makes me laugh. I find, I just love Pan's aesthetic, even when it's very, very silly. I find that it is their sense of the absurd is really to the fore here, and I can see exactly why they went for this novel. I mean, it's the perfect choice. So I really enjoyed it. I found it. I think even in a festival that is full of quite serious and really quite challenging subject matter, and a lot of it about contemporary Ireland and all its problems. I did enjoy just laughing at this, and I was up for it, a bit more improv and interaction. I thought we were going to, because as you said, Brian and Peter said, the way we were seated, I thought, no, we were going to get involved in this book club, and I was ready. And I then went back and read the novel yesterday, so I did it in reverse order. I had read her short stories, and they're very similar in that sense of startling fantasy. and really quite bizarre things happening. So
it stayed with me far more than I expected it to, even after I'd left.
Yeah.
I left thinking, yeah, okay, that was interesting, but I'm still thinking about it. And I'm also still thinking about it in an obsessive fashion, doing it in floral arrangements, which are possibly an incredibly strange duo. And Peter, please take us through them.
Thank you very much, Gemma. I'll do my best. So doing it and floral arrangements are a double bill of what we can call performance lectures. And they come from Portugal's Teatro Praga, but they're part of, I think, an original collection or suite or even festivals curated by Lola Arias, who's an Argentinian theater maker, who's quite a wide and varied career, but a considerable strand of which is about documentary theater or reality theater. She works with Stefan Kagi, and they've done work called Ciudades Paralelas, about kind of responding to real life in different cities. It seemed to be kind of a part of maybe that strand of her work than her other original performances. Two pieces. This theatre festival has indexed fairly heavily on Portuguese theatre throughout the years. I still couldn't tell you that I've discerned kind of very coherent trends, practices, or whatever through the work. But this, like a number of the productions that we've seen, were immensely portable pieces. And they struck me as works that were built to travel fairly easily or not at all. I think while the presence of these performers in the space was a wonderful and much missed thing, I did wonder how much would be lost in translation if they were only streamed instead. It felt there was a kind of quite a contingency around them, that they would work in the event that this festival couldn't have proceeded as it wanted to, which was very much the case last year. So they were a fail-safe option to book. The first of them is performed by Pedro Penin. And it's a guided tour of some of the world's most remote islands, conducted by a character who refers to himself as an avowed islamaniac, somebody who is almost unnaturally pleased with the idea of living on an island or existing on an island, to be remote, surrounded by water, and have no particular access to others. He speaks of himself only in the third person, because it turns out one man can be an island, even to himself. And he speaks of it with a sense of shame, as though he is revealing too much about it. The method, however, that he uses, and it's blown up in front of you on a huge screen overhead as he sits at a desk in a tie-dyed hoodie under a working lamp. The method is very familiar. He's very familiar to anybody who's been working remotely for 19 months or so, because he investigates the island using the godlike aperture of Google Earth. So hovering above the globe and zooming down into these various locations. And as he explores the islands, he explores them with a battery of open tabs in a web browser, which is what I am currently doing. And he gets a cascade of information, which is the kind of stuff that, technology, the great promise of the technology is that we are all super connected and we can go anywhere without sort of leaving our desk. And then the great irony of that is it only seems to reinforce how isolated we are while doing so, how disconnected from a real life experience that is. And as he sort of hops around these different islands, talks about his thoughts, his associations, I thought of, go back to the book club, a famous story or famous book, A Journey Around My Room, which is 1794 publication by Xavier de Maestro, which is kind of like a literary experiment about a travelogue based in one person's room who is confined and cannot go anywhere. And that's very much the exercise of this particular production. It felt also that we are experiencing something and have been experiencing something quite similar to his obsession, to be sort of so cut off from experience and to sort of want it so desperately, so poignantly. But while he explodes his notion as a Portuguese man who's aware of kind of the history of colonialism, the septic fantasies of Ireland explored in the politics of how damaged islands become by human contact, how abandoned islanders are by colonial forces, how destroyed flora and fauna are by people who don't treat them correctly. I think we're all very aware of that. That bubble is sort of burst for the audience before Penin has an opportunity to do that. So kind of I admired the technique of the production. I kind of absolutely understand the desires within the production, but I didn't extract much more out of it than that. The second in the double bill is Floral Arrangements, which is a considerably more charming story. And it's told by the beautifully hesitant Felipe Pereira. He spends the performance in a busy act of a floral arrangement of his own on a very large scale, steadily constructing something that appears to you as he places fronds and palms and flowers into buckets, just kind of creating this extraordinary installation on stage. As he does so, he recalls his own personal history as a young boy growing up in Fatima in Portugal, the pilgrim Mecca, in a deeply conservative Catholic family, where he gravitates, I think, through a combination of sort of personality and talent, and then later sexuality, to the most astonishing displays that he finds as a young boy in a kind of a very Catholic conservative community, which are the floral arrangements in his church on the altar, the way that the flower arrangers decorate the sacred space, the entrance, and so on. And that at times of festivals, how elaborate they become. He studies, he learns, he emulates, and he becomes an astonishing artist in this particular form. And you see in documentary evidence through pictures of kind of his work, how his craft builds. And it becomes astonishing. As it does, the more it evolves, the more he himself questions his faith and loses his faith. He tends to speak in kind of floral arrangements of his own. He refers to belief as, or his belief as decaying, a decaying sense of God. He imagines kind of his belief in nature becomes ever more rooted, ever more stronger. The mysteries of nature become more palpable to him. And then the great irony of his career, which is to say also his life, is that the more he loses faith in God and the divine, the more elaborate and abstracted his flower arrangements become, the more ambitious, the more attention they receive, and the more kind of valorized, the more heroic figure he becomes in his hometown, in his celebrations. And at the same time, his life has now bifurcated. He's essentially living a double life. He's studying dance in Lisbon. He's, on Grindr. He's discovering kind of like a much more self-defined sexuality. And he still sees the value in what he does in Fatima. He still sees the local pride. He still sees himself in it, even as he's sort of like being torn apart. A funny thing about it is, in performance, there's a strange conflict between his self-definition and the way he sort of is bid, either by family or by faith. Because in the production, he is prompted throughout by an offstage prompter. And rather than sort of give the audience a sense of is he losing his script, is this going off the rails, those prompts are also being translated for you simultaneously on the surtitles. And you might mention your own experience in that regard, Gemma. I understand you had a slightly different encounter with him, but kind of that it's very much kind of problematized and foregrounded, the sense that his memories are triggered by somebody else. Is he entirely able to be sort of master of his own destiny, or does he have to follow somebody else's instruction? And there's a kind of a dance then between self-definition and the divine. I think kind of how he finally reconciles it, leaving the artifact of this absolutely, astonishing explosion of color, which finally sort of takes over the stage of the Beckett Theatre, is a beautiful reconciliation. It's also the thing that you cannot do through a Zoom call. You cannot smell the foliage or experience the petals or stand in front of it admiringly at the end. So it's an adorable performance. It's an absolutely gorgeous history. I don't know that I've learned anything more about Portuguese theatre making as a result of it, but was very, very happy to be back in that space.
You mentioned that they were possibly booked because they would have worked perfectly well as a stream. The night I went, and I actually thought it was deliberate, the subtitles stopped working 5 minutes in, and the offstage prompter was helping the narrator with words that he didn't know in English because his English was quite hesitant. And what happened for us was the entire audience was rooting for him. And I could feel us all. And occasionally he'd say, "Have I got that right?" And we'd go, "Yeah, you have." And you don't get that on a Zoom either.
Mm-hmm,
and the atmosphere in the theatre was pure and lovely. And that's been very rare lately too. But the other thing was that strengthening scent of the flowers, because also he's so self-deprecating to start with. I thought his arrangement was going to be really crap, and it was phenomenal. Brian, did you love it?
I was really moved by it. I was struggling with the hesitancy. I thought it was going to be another lecture like doing it, which actually I found really charming. But for this one, I was really moved, and nothing went wrong like it did with your performance, Gemma. But I could feel the audience at the end really going with it and really rooting with it as the whole thing came, the whole creation came. And I was thinking about this. This is one that hasn't left me, and I didn't think it would. And I was thinking, I remember many, many years ago at the Douglas Hyde Gallery. For a whole week, there was some Buddhist monks who created a sound mandala.
Yeah.
And at the end of the week, they all went in procession. They took it in procession and slowly tipped it into the Liffey. And it was one of the most extraordinarily moving things. I often, during the week, I would go into the Douglas Hyde to watch and see it come
I
together.
remember it, yeah.
And I got this spiritual experience of watching this man, the self-deprecating man, creating this floral arrangement in front of me, which was that isn't that just amazing? This the artistry in that, and for me, as his journey, I think he went on a spiritual journey, as opposed to losing. He lost his faith, but he still maintained some kind of spiritualism, and he found the spiritualism through his flower arranging. Whereas I wanted him to dance more. Because he trained as a dancer, and I didn't see that. But absolutely, I found this one, yes, an obsession with flowers, but it is an obsession that helped him, because we saw photographs of him in his early days, where it was very telling as a child, one after the other, where he was a very happy boy. The happy face became quite sullen, and then really, living. Can you imagine living in Fatima, of all places? Where it's just you're just beaten on the head with it, and here, despite his move to Lisbon, despite his rejection of religion, he still is creating a kind of a spiritual experience, and he's recreating it every night. And I'm thinking, what's going to happen to this? I was there the first night, and I said, well, what's going to happen to this? Can we keep it?
Well, I will answer that question because it only ran for 2 nights, and I was there on the second night. And at the end, he said, you can take the flowers as you go. And I'm staying with my parents, and I thought, I should take some flowers. I didn't, because I didn't want to be part of, I felt I
desecration.
Yeah, even though other people were quite rightly helping themselves to flowers. But I felt, like you say, Brian, he had created a monument to beauty or something.
Oh, I would have hated that. I would have told them off.
Eat them.
Put them off there.
I'm mindful of time, which also means it's time to have a conversation after sex. And I'm hoping Helen will chat to us about that.
Yeah, sure. Very happy to. So this is a play by Mark O'Halloran, and it was in Project Art Centre, and it's an intense two-hand. No, it's not a two-hander. Sorry, but there are 2 characters in a bed for a large part of it, and the bed is absolutely center stage. It sort of dominates the space, and it's a remarkably intense, focused experience. The play, the writing is extremely spare and distilled, and there's nothing extraneous. It is actually the conversations between these two, this woman played by, they're all nameless, by the way, by Kate Stanley Brennan, and the men that she meets for sex. She's not trying to meet her husband or future husband or anything like that. It's very kind of resolutely not about romance. They're meeting up for sex. And so it's all done online by an app, and they meet in different, very, very anonymous city centre spaces. It's Dublin, and it's now, and she's a woman, I say, in her 30s, and so it's very, very interesting in the light of once before I go, and that sense of all the struggles for those two, for her to meet these men like that for sex, for a woman in Ireland. You just keep thinking of back to the 80s, that this is really hard to imagine. This actually been able to happen, and that the woman is trying as far as possible to be in control of these situations, and again, that is a very difficult thing. So you have to sort of see that in the context of Ireland today, and also I found myself thinking about what the play isn't looking at. And we'll come back to that. But it's really about this woman is grieving. She's had a horrifically traumatic end to a relationship, ending it in the worst possible way, in terrible violence, and she's traumatized, and she's meeting for sex because she wants to have sex, and she's trying to separate her emotions from her sexual drive, if you like, and really that's what the play becomes about, is the degree to which she meets the same men, 3 men actually, over at intervals over the course of a year, and it's a question of how well do they get to know each other? At what point do either of them, in thinking of each couple at a time, let their guard down? So it really isn't about the sex. It is actually about the intimacy that may or may not develop through what they say to each other. I mean, that's a superb kind of focus, because it leaves you to listen to every word they say, to every nuance, and the fact that they open it with nudity becomes irrelevant. It's like, how much are they revealing of themselves? And there is one man that she meets who will not even tell her his name, and that becomes an issue, and she finds herself getting angry. So it's really interesting. So we see the emotional journey, development, change, if you like, of the Kate Stanley Brennan character over a year. You start to ask, is this helping her in any way, or is she just stuck in some sort of pattern? Is it just self-destructive, or is it actually helping her to recover? And it asks a lot of those questions, and it does so in a kind of very heightened way that's, I think, not fully realistic. It reminds me a lot of Carol Churchill's writing, in that very, very, very pared back. And so what we don't see, or we see only very fleetingly, is the real risk of violence to her. I mean, there's a very fleeting moment where she seems to be grappling with one of the men that she has met in the room, seems to be attacking her. But that's the fact that could have happened on any of these occasions is glossed over. And also the question that any woman would be thinking, what about contraception and the risk of becoming pregnant or contracting a disease? And there is a very brief reference to a sexually transmitted disease, but it's almost put off onto the male character. So I think there are lots of things that are deliberately omitted, and then very cleverly the design. When we actually go to her own home, the character inherited a house. It's almost as anonymous as the various hotel rooms and house shares that she's in to meet up for sex. So this almost as if she's deliberately choosing not to reveal anything about herself unless she wants to. And then as we go through over the course of the years, she starts to choose to want to. So it's about the possibility of connection, even almost despite yourself. So there's some very, very interesting emotional nuances there. And I found myself utterly gripped by it. And the fact, the night I saw the silence, that's what we haven't had, in a packed auditorium, wrapped, like utter silence. And between the wonderful scene changes, where Fiona Lunchi, sorry, I didn't mention the actor's name, I don't believe I didn't mention it. He's playing all the male characters, and he has to just keep changing, like lights go down, beautiful lighting, beautiful design, and he comes back in as a different man entirely, wearing only his underwear. It's remarkable. The character switches are remarkable, because he has to do more of that. Like but again, it's about what are the men expecting from these encounters, and how often you might think that of a man who will meet up with a woman like that in a particular way, and it confounds all of those expectations, and then it becomes about the 3 main characters, the men that she meets repeatedly. It's about their journey to vulnerability, expressing vulnerability, and their loneliness and their sense of dislocation, which Mark O'Halloran has explored before, in Trade particularly, but that was about an older gay man, a secret relationship, whereas these are grown adults choosing to meet up, and it's fascinating. I found it really fascinating. And
Ryan, how was it for you?
It's similar to Helen. It's. I saw it last night. It's incredibly gripping, moving, and it held me. I didn't know where the time went. It suddenly was over, and but I could see this very subtle, slight hints. It's so well directed as well by Tom Creed, with just the detailed performances all the way through. And of course, there's a third character, the woman's sister, who comes in, and she's married. She's in a so-called stable relationship, and yet she's finding out things from her husband's phone that leads her to question her whole existence. And that so it's interesting to watch the two women together. But it is really it's incredibly moving in terms of the relationship between intimacy and vulnerability. With those two things together, and also the strategies of how they deal with it and how she deflects any kind of intimacy at the beginning, and so you can see her change ever so slightly towards the end. It's so subtle, and I'd love to see it. In fact, I booked a ticket to see the live stream again because I want to see it again.
I think actually there was some cleverness that wasn't annoyingly clever, in that as it went on, she put more clothes on. So as she became more open, she began to wear more. Peter, what did you think?
I was absolutely absorbed by it, and absolutely yes. There's that kind of reverse striptease throughout the production, in which more and more is revealed, but it's not a kind of sequential thing. It's not a linear thing. It's kind of like detail gathers. There are two things you can say about Kate Stanley Brennan's character. One is that she's got a clear thing for men with regional accents. That helps an awful lot in Fiona Launcey's performance, because he can distinguish very clearly between a Belfast or a Northern England or a South County Dublin or a North County Dublin individual. It's also, she is different with different people. I think kind of one thing that O'Halloran absolutely understands is that we are completed in different ways with other individuals, that you wouldn't go so far as to, well, maybe you can call these relationships, but they extract different components of our personalities. I think, again, the poignant thing is to go through a period of intense isolation. I mean, Helen, you said it's set in Dublin today. I don't think it is. I don't think it can be. I think it's hard to get into a bar at the moment without showing your COVID cert. Getting into a hotel for an afternoon with a stranger feels like something that's pre-pandemic. And kind of like, so the notion of sort of what that sort of social intercourse is, never mind sexual intercourse, is, again, there's a disconnect to watch that in a space where you are 2 empty seats away from your next human being, and where you can watch them interacting with nothing kind of that requires any more touch than their touch screens going through Instagram feeds. So like there's a strange kind of poignancy in just the sort of discrepancy between our active viewing and what's being represented. So the fact that she's grieving, I think, is absolutely fascinating. The fact that she is in different states of candor or concealment with individuals is, again, kind of quite fascinating. And the fact that the personality she's encounters in sort of the afterglow and then sometimes the aftermath of sex becomes so wildly different is all very, very revealing about what human nature is. But I think there was kind of an attention to detail and also a great sympathy to, refreshingly, those male figures. Absolutely, kind of, they came with edge, and they were, many of them, comical, the brittleness, the self-absorption, but they're never two-dimensional in the performance that Fiona Launcey delivers. You get a sense of them actually being complete people with real histories. And then a sense of what we divulge in the afterglow or aftermath of sex. This is, the title is high concept. It's conversations after sex. Each scene happens after sex. It reminded me of a line in One Man, Two Governors, in which the harlequin figure finishes a meal and says to the audience, now, if the harlequin is fed, you're wondering, some people in the audience are saying, what's my motivation? And here, it's a sense of, if your sexual needs are sated, what then? The mystery in her character is that we never quite see what drove her into the encounter to begin with, right? Kind of like, why him, why now? And it's only then what is dislodged or surfaced after the act that we kind of are privy to. I think that also accounts to that time disappearing, Brian, the fact that it goes in such a clip. It's such a kind of an episodic way to pursue a play. I think there's precedence. I think kind of like it did remind me to a degree, and maybe kind of, in both title and structure, of Sexual Perversity in Chicago, the old David Mamet play, which again is episodic, features lots of pillow talk and sexual frankness. Here, though, it's the female perspective is real and felt, and fully evinced in both, I think, performance and writing. I'm absolutely captivated. Again, I would say, and I don't know that this has been explored enough. Sue Mythen is credited with intimacy director of the production. It's not the only production she's credited with intimacy direction. She's also intimacy director in Once Before I Go. Intimacy direction at the moment feels like it could be a full-time gig, and not just for theatre and workplace considerations, but actually how we are re-engaging with each other in close proximity spaces like the theatre. But I felt that the way our intimacy was directed was equally artful. And again, and unlike my misgivings when I encountered a live audience for the first time at this festival, I was fully ready to go back to whatever house party we were having afterwards.
Helen mentioned, and I think you're absolutely right, that it doesn't allude, and it's not its job to all the battles that had been won in order to be able to stage a play like that, or even consider it. And I saw it on the night. Actually, that's not true. The next play we're going to discuss, I saw on the day that the budget announced free contraception, which was unthinkable when I was in college. I think it was only just being legalized. So Purple Snowflakes is another play that is a testament to the battles that previous generations have fought. And Peter, do you want to talk us through that?
I'd even deliver the full title if you want. Purple Snowflakes and Tittywanks, which is the debut play from Sarah Hanley, Irish actor, writer, I think based in London, and a play that feels sort of semi-autobiographical about a sort of a coming-of-age story told with admirable, real sexual frankness, about a young Irish woman leaving a convent school in Wicklow to pursue musical theatre in London, contending with issues of sexuality, awakening sexuality, with body politics, and first and foremost with her own sense of agency coming from this particular background. And I think given sort of our own history of art, of theatre, of novels about sexual awakenings and religious repression, where we probably have more consideration and more evidence of the religious repression dominating, it's quite refreshing to see this concentrate on the sexual awakening. The religious repression is delivered in a tone that I found quite remarkable, with a sort of a breeziness, which feels like this generation's inheritance to what you're describing. And that it begins essentially with two young girls in school, I think to quote it near enough directly, touching each other in the oratory, which is to say exploring each other in the holiest of holies, and using rosary beads in the way that you might enlist the services of something that you acquire online under a pseudonym, was again the kind of the tone and emphasis of a performance that we're probably unused to seeing. And it's less a sense that it's kind of nakedly provocative, and more that the weightlessness in that discussion, even the weightlessness in discussion of things like sexual scandals with purely, conceivable and conspicuous real histories, such as her mother taking up residence with a priest, which again absolutely summons memories of Eamon Casey, and even kind of like personally traumatic events, like her father absconding early from the family and sort of a fake funeral being staged to account for the shame, and then even sort of a regrettable sexual encounter, which becomes a pivot point for the character. It's all relayed to us with a sort of a cartoon gravity that's enforced by the production, directed by is it Alice Fitzgerald, in kind of bright hues. And it reminded me of sort of Derry Girls, Lisa McGee's Derry Girls, a sense of like the history happening, but through the perspective of young teen characters, where it won't leave as heavy a dent as we imagined it has before. And there are sideways glances, I think, kind of at the sexual coming of age in something like Sally Rooney's Normal People, and maybe the sexual frankness of Fleabag, which comes with the direct address that she makes to an absent character, her friend Ashley. The resilience of the generation struck me as something fresh. And then there are things that strike me as things that never change. That's her, it's expressed here in the sense that she wants to play Antigone and cannot, and is saddled with the role of Creon, which she performs in a sort of slightly subversive and sardonic way by donning a huge prosthetic pair of testicles, which swing with abandon through her performance. And yet she sort of takes on the role of Antigone indirectly by mounting a challenge to her school system, to the nuns, to the convent school structure, asking for girls to be schooled not in passivity, but in matters of consent and self-determination. And that the play kind of finally settles into the discrepancy between what one can control and what one cannot control. So she cannot control, for instance, the parts that she takes. She cannot control the way her sexuality is described by others. She cannot control her family. The one thing she can control, kind of tragically, is what she consumes or doesn't consume, what she does to her body. And so her bulimia is expressed in a sort of like a quite kind of harrowingly detailed perspective of what it is to be bulimic, both the satisfaction of making herself empty and then kind of like the pain and consequence of so doing. And then also the sort of the self-harm aspect of control, which in London sort of settles into drug usage and kind of like, complete kind of near self-annihilation. There's a line that popped out that I haven't forgotten. She refers to avoided existence and a kind of a blanket of chaos that she wraps around her. And that itself sort of is the agency that she's able to seize in the world, for all the levity, for all the sort of weightlessness that I feel the production is imbued with. But it's finally somewhere between reality and a fairy tale. I don't think it's coincidental that it ends with the depiction of a fairy tale, as though finally she'll only bear so much reality.
I felt the ending let it down slightly. Helen, what did you think?
Yes, I did. Though I thought there was, I suppose, a slight tension for me throughout, actually, about the tone, and in a way the ending was kind of part of that. But I mean, the serious points I think really did strike me about how the relationship with the young men and that the boys and the expectation around the young women's sexual response to and the kind of exploitative and the sort of self-hating aspect of the sexual experience she has in the car park, which was very demeaning, and that to me is different. That's so there's those important questions about consent, but then what seems to be expected of young women, that sort of sexual availability, and then a sort of a horrible, it's very different to conversations after sex, actually, a kind of a horrible, slightly humiliating aspect. And I found that touched me in the sense that, of course, this is a very young woman. She's writing about being a schoolgirl, and that seemed to me to be taking a very backward step in terms of the relationships between young men and young women. And I think the use and ubiquity of pornography is very much, it has been a big influence, and then the pressure then on the girls to the way they think about their own bodies, the way they present themselves, and then the fact that that then turns inwards into self-harm, which is also a very more recent phenomenon. We always had, anorexia and bulimia, but the prevalence of self-harm and suicide and all those things, and that this is a different set of problems than the teenagers of Edna O'Brien, the country girls, or so yes, there's this ability to talk about your own sexual desire as a young woman and to fulfill it and all of that, but then there's all this other stuff that is new to us, but is really even more complicated and is just amplified by the online world and on social media, and how young women have to present or feel the pressure to present themselves. So this play, I thought that's what I got out of it. A lot of really good commentary on the reality of being a teenage schoolgirl in Ireland. I was a bit surprised. I found the religious references a bit surprising, actually. I felt they were slightly from another. I felt they were more cliched, and I know it was humorous, but there were an awful lot of nuns, and I was a bit surprised, and I found that less original to me. I thought this is really well-worn territory, and I felt that the school scene where she actually kind of takes control and speaks directly to the audience, speaks her truth, calls out all the hypocrites around her in the adult world, was really a powerful, a dramatic scene. And then I felt the rest of it was slightly fizzling out. And the production is highly, highly polished and beautiful, and the colors and quite soft focus. And I think if I come across this as a solo stand-up in a Fringe, I would have found it something more powerful in it, that's in the writing, but the production did, to me, sort of smooth it out and make it all more sort of pretty.
Brian, what did you think?
Yeah, I found, I had a similar reaction to it. I thought that the first part of it, particularly around religion, well, I'm obviously, coming at it from having taught plays for 30 years in Dublin, and in those 90s, he didn't even mention the word sex, and all the students would look at the shoes. It just was impossible. You could never have a conversation about it. So, I mean, that's, the title itself is just so in your face, and it really, it's a co-production with the Royal Court, and notable for its in-your-face drama of the past. And I felt it harked back to that kind of era, and particularly the references to the church. Everyone that was very funny because it's past. We could laugh at it, but what's lingering now, of course, is consent, sexual assault, and body image, and what that leads to. And I think that's, I think the play, it's quite heavy-handed at the beginning, and then it brings in these themes, and yet the same or relentless theatricality of it doesn't let the themes, those really interesting things, land too long, because we touch upon, or she touches upon them, and then off she goes again on the story. And I thought, okay, well, maybe that just deserves a little bit more thought. Maybe several of these things deserve a little bit more thought. So it's one thing I'd never seen her before. She's very, very confident, and it's her own play, of course, but I was fascinated by how she constructed the world. And she had, she didn't change clothes. She had this belly bag, as it's called in the script. And I was fascinated. I said, where do all these things come from? It's only very small. And she just kept taking more and more things out of it. It's as if it's, she's got the whole world in this bag. And it just gets bigger, and these things get bigger and bigger. And I was thinking this morning, during one of those changeovers, they must have given her a separate bag or restocked her bag. And I'm not saying that because it's funny. It's because I found it. The bag released the next scene, and it's just constantly releasing the next scene. And it was I wanted her to slow down.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to let the story land somewhere occasionally, and let me be with it a little bit longer. These are serious issues here.
There was one
And
point which she returned to where she'd asked the nuns in school to teach them how to say no, and she brought that up again later. And I almost wanted the ending to bring that in again in some way, but the sort of happy ever after commune that's founded just seemed to have come from another play.
I suppose that's it's a moment of hope in a very, to all intents and purposes, a very difficult life that she's had, for all the humour in it. It's for one young girl to go through all that. That's an extraordinary life story, and I was glad actually with the ending. To be honest with you, um, not a satisfying one, but just a little uptick at the end, and I felt okay. That releases me now from this world, and and I don't particularly want to go back into it. And I'm not. That's not a criticism of the play or the production, which is very, very good. It's just I felt we need. There aren't enough plays yet in the theatre about these issues. We're beginning to get them. Uh, we need more of them. It needs to be explored more deeply. And compared to the conversations after sex, which it's so pared, as Helen says, is really pared back to its essence. And yet this is the opposite. It's really just out there in your face. But you could enjoy it and experience it on that level of physical slapstick comedy, well-worn comedy, cartoon like. There's a lot in it to enjoy. It's
And
just
very strong performance.
huge, wonderful, and well designed and beautifully lit. Uh, it's just if you're bringing up those themes, I think you need to just get a little bit deeper with them.
And speaking of being released from the world, we are coming up to the end of our time. I would really love to thank Derval Mele and Kate Brady from the Theatre Festival who put this together, and all the amazing companies, crews, teams, and the marvelous box office who seldom get singled out for special attention, but it must be like juggling fish trying to find tickets for sold out shows for theatre critics with weird schedule changes, and they handle it with grace and aplomb. I want to thank Brian, Helen, and Peter, and all of you for joining us. And please stream the plays, please keep going. 6 astonishing things that we saw, and there's plenty more to come. So thank you all.
Thank you.